Okay, I just want to weigh in a little bit about the Commonwealth Summit in Sri Lanka, and some of the controversies surrounding that. Now, for those of you who don't know, the Commonwealth is a group of nations that are generally composed of the former British Empire. It's a voluntary association. Countries that are in the Commonwealth are there by choice, and it's one of the world's largest bodies of nations that are connected diplomatically through trade, culture, and other reasons. So the summit is always quite a big event. Now, the reason it's attracted so much controversy this year is because it's just 4 years since a very bloody and brutal civil war in Sri Lanka ended. India, Mauritius, and Canada have boycotted this summit on the grounds of alleged human rights violations in Sri Lanka. I just want to speak a little bit about the Sri Lankan response to these claims and David Cameron's position on that. Now, unlike the Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper or Manmohan Singh or the Mauritian President, I'm sorry, I don't know his name, Cameron has decided to go. I think if the mother nation of the Commonwealth, and let's be honest, the United Kingdom is the mother nation, there would be no Commonwealth without the UK. That's a simple fact. If the UK decided to boycott it, that would definitely be a very big thing in itself. Both Prince Charles and David Cameron have went ahead and gone to the summit. Although Cameron has been very insistent that he's going to raise these issues and he's going to be very forthright about it. Apparently he's had a very upfront dialogue with Mr. Rajapaksa one-on-one. Both men are standing by their position. For his part, Mr. Rajapaksa is saying that Britain is acting like an old colonizer, treating Sri Lanka like a colony, and they have their quote-unquote their own system for doing things. Mr. Cameron, for his part, is saying that the video footage that he has seen has been chilling, and that he has an obligation to raise these issues. Yesterday news footage showed David Cameron visiting Tamil communities in the north, and his convoy was actually overwhelmed by groups of women crying and holding photographs of their loved ones, men who were missing either during the Civil War or in recent years. Sri Lankan security forces apparently pushed them away. Well, that's understandable. If you have a world leader visiting a place, obviously they didn't want any sort of incident, but I think this demonstrates that the image that Rajapaksa is trying to send across, that Sri Lanka is a country on the mend, is dubious. In the south, and certainly among the Sinhalese community, he is widely venerated. He's seen as a war hero. He's seen as the man who defeated Tamil Tiger terrorism, and he's venerated. But in the north, it's a very different image. There is grave concerns about human rights abuses, disappearances, violations by the Sri Lankan army, including rapes. All these allegations have been made. It's estimated that up to 40,000 people were killed in the final months of the war. So these are all very grave issues. Now, first of all, to the colony claim, I believe that when a leader of a smaller country wants to put up a front when human rights concerns are raised, there is no easier way to do that than to use a colony card, i.e., oh, it's the big bad British Empire trying to bully us around and tell us what to do. But look at it from another perspective. If David Cameron was absolutely silent, said nothing, and was all politeness and etiquette, he would be facing criticism from the Tamil community for not saying anything. So you have to look at it from that perspective. It's very well saying that Britain's acting like a colonising bully, but I happen to think that that's simply an excuse by the Sri Lankan authorities to be complacent about the position they're in. Now they say that an investigation is underway, but this is not an independent investigation. And that's what David Cameron and other world leaders are calling for, an independent investigation into these alleged atrocities. Now, if Mr. Rajapaksa has nothing to fear, then why not accept that independent investigation? It's quite simple. If this isn't a situation of double standards, because Britain has not seen a bloody civil war where 40,000 people were believed to have died in the final months. So I don't think it's a question of double standards, because this situation simply doesn't apply in the UK. It does apply in Sri Lanka. And I believe if Sri Lanka is hosting this summit, then it also must take some responsibility, instead of this very arrogant defensive attitude from Rajapaksa. In other words, if you're hosting a summit like this, then this sort of approach of "you cannot criticise us" just comes across as quite arrogant, because Britain has every right to criticise or to scrutinise. If we're going to attend the summit, we, I believe, have every right to raise legitimate questions of concern. Now, David Cameron hasn't come out and said you are guilty of this. He's simply raising the issues. Let's be clear about that. He hasn't come out and said, Mr. Rajapaksa, your government is guilty of this. He's simply raising the allegations. And like I said, I really do believe that the colony argument is an excuse to get away with doing anything. And I believe if David Cameron didn't raise these issues, he would face enormous criticism from the Tamil community for basically placating President Rajapaksa, for putting on this sort of front of everything's really going well in this country, and quite clearly it's not, because these allegations are ongoing. I do give David Cameron credit for going there to the north. He's the first, I understand, the first world leader to do that, and he does deserve credit for that. Just back to the double standards issue, I said that there's obviously not a comparison that Britain hasn't had a bloody civil war, but when you have the UK sending investment to Sri Lanka, sending money to Sri Lanka, I think it's more than reasonable that we ask legitimate questions. Why should we send money to Mr. Rajapaksa's government and then be told, oh, you cannot ask questions? I think that's an absurd position to take, and I think the arrogance here is coming from Colombo. And this also applies to other countries that like to use, other governments I should say, that like to use a colony card every time that questions are raised about legitimate human rights concerns. Now, in regards to double standards, I don't think anyone is suggesting here that the United Kingdom is a perfect country. I mean, for my part, I think Cameron's domestic record in the UK must also face some scrutiny, especially we have issues like workfare, forced unpaid labour. But let's be quite clear about this, the sort of claims that are being made in Sri Lanka are very, very grave, and you don't have similar claims in Britain. You do not have allegations that the British Army rapes minority British women. That it's just not the case, whereas that is the situation in Sri Lanka. Now, I'm not saying that I am on the side of the Tamil community. I'm simply saying that their concerns must be taken seriously. And another point, I think there's a tendency here for the Tamil people to be vilified as terrorists, all Tamil people. The Tamil Tigers were guilty of many atrocities during the war. There's no question about that. But there was atrocities on both sides, and the Sri Lankan army was also responsible for atrocities. This was a very brutal, very bloody civil war. I'm not convinced that the summit should have been held in Sri Lanka at this time. Maybe in the future, not right now, 4 years after the war ended, not with these sort of very grave abuses being raised. So I just conclude with that. I think if we are sending money to Sri Lanka, we do have a right to raise questions, and Mr. Rajapaksa should expect that. I mean, what does he want? Does he want the this triumphalist, venerate me sort of display from David Cameron? Does he want world leaders to give him a big back slap and say what a wonderful leader he is? I think he should show responsibility in this regard, and if, like I say, I don't know for a fact what's happening on the ground. I don't know that. But what I'm saying is, it's entirely legitimate to ask that there's an independent inquiry. I don't think that's an outrageous claim. I don't think it's an outrageous thing. And I don't see how it's neo-colonialist. We aren't saying we're going to impose British law on Sri Lanka. Quite clearly, we're not saying that. But I think it's more than reasonable that visiting heads of state do ask questions. And let's be clear, David Cameron's not the only one. Like I say, Canada, India, Mauritius, those three countries have taken a similar stance. So, yeah. I think, basically, I honestly believe that when the colony thing is used, more often than not, it's an excuse. I'm not saying that the United Kingdom's never capable of arrogance, but I do believe that when this claim of colonising is used, it is basically an excuse for governments to do as they please. And it isn't just Sri Lanka. This can be seen in much bigger countries like China. The Chinese regime has often accused Western critics of displaying a neo-colonialist attitude, even though China is the second most powerful country on earth. Anyway, I'll leave it there. But basically, I think that's an excuse, and I think there should be an independent inquiry into these very grave claims. And whilst I totally acknowledge that Mr. Rajapaksa is venerated, that doesn't mean that he is above criticism, and it doesn't mean his government is above criticism.